2 years ago, I was told, your child is a danger to other children. My then 5-year-old daughter, Rosie, non-verbal and struggling in a world not designed for her. A danger, a threat to the safety of the school community. Now, around the same time, we bought my son a leopard gecko, mainly motivated by this being a screen-free habit during the pandemic years, and he loved looking after her, feeding her bugs, changing the substrate, handling her. Now, we have since adopted 3 more scaly friends. Now, you may be wondering, what on earth does a leopard gecko have to do with my daughter's disability? So let me explain. Over the past 2 years, I have really struggled to come to terms with my daughter's disability and the long-term implications on her life. And something that helped me and my family process this was to tell ourselves to be reptile-skinned. Absorb and process feelings in cycles, just in the way that reptiles shed and regenerate skin. And I hope that by sharing my personal story with you today, I can encourage other people going through challenges to be reptile-skinned too. Don't deny, but accept difficulties, and I promise you, eventually you will begin to find new layers of strength and hope. Now let's just take a moment and talk about how awesome reptiles are, because I've always wondered why people, especially children, are so fascinated by them. Is it their kind of unconventional behavior, or, a tortoise retreating into a shell, basilisk lizards walking on water? Does this give them this cool outsider status that kids relate to? Is it their similarities to dinosaurs or links to mythological creatures like dragons? Or could it be the sense of empowerment they represent? Their ability to survive and defend themselves in the harshest of environments. And it's interesting because when I was a child, a lot of the books or stories or films that I consumed, they showed animals kind of representing human qualities, things we could look up to. Think about the tortoise that slowly overcomes the heron and the wraith, showing you that not always shining and sometimes being slow and steady could be better. The ugly duckling that shows sometimes being the misfit, well, you might be better than everyone else. And I actually think as adults, we shouldn't forget about these stories, and if anything, we should continue to look at the physical properties of animals and think about how this can help give us metaphors and coping strategies for life. Now, perhaps the most fascinating thing of all about reptiles is how they shed and outgrow their skin. They emerge from this dullish, dormant stage with ever brighter coloration. Now, for me and some of the older people in the audience, when we were children, if we were having a hard time or struggling or upset, you may have been told to be thick-skinned, toughen up, persevere. And sometimes I think teenagers nowadays, particularly in Western countries, may have the opposite extreme. Be vulnerable, open up, it's okay to cry. And while I'm not saying any of these things don't have a place, instead I would encourage everyone to be reptile-skinned. Take time to process and absorb your feelings, and when needed, retreat and shut the world out around you. In our family's experience, we really struggle to come to terms with our daughter's disability and the long-term implications on her life. The fact is, Rosie may never be fully independent when me and my wife are no longer on earth to look after her. And that's not an easy thing to accept. In fact, it's terrifying and it's heartbreaking. Before shedding, the reptile's outer layer of skin becomes dull, cracked, and immobile, resistant to coming off. A bit like humans resistant to accepting a difficult situation, And we commonly refer to this as denial. And I think it's amazing how flippantly we might mention someone else is in denial. But I would argue that this defense mechanism should not be dismissed and it should not be judged harshly. Because just as that reptile needs to hold on to its outer layer of skin before the new skin is strong and tough enough to push through, a human being may have to consciously or unconsciously refuse to accept a situation that is too distressing, too overwhelming for them to process, until they are ready to do so. And sometimes pushing them too early, it's like ripping their skin right off, not acting as a catalyst, but prolonging the acceptance process. Now, in our situation, maybe we were in denial. And I'll tell you why. We were resistant to giving up the dream that Rosie would catch up and live a normal life. Just in the same way that a reptile is resistant to shedding that top layer of skin. And we clutched at every possible straw. We would say things like, hey, she's just a slow developer. Well, you know, she's being brought up in a bilingual environment. Speech takes longer. Did you know Einstein didn't speak in sentences till he was 3, and he turned out to be a genius? But eventually, I started to feel perpetual sadness, stress, and anger. And I told myself at the time this was work burnout. I would function almost hyper-efficiently at my job throughout the week. But things would sometimes crash on the weekends, and there were some Saturdays where I struggled to find the energy or the motivation to get out of bed. Just before shedding, reptiles feel at their most vulnerable. They seek safety, and they prefer to hide away. They slow down their metabolism, they stop eating, their colours dull. And for some geckos, this cloudy protective membrane forms over their eyes. Well, when the membrane finally cleared from my eyes, and I was able to see what was in front of me, it felt painful. It felt raw. But it also felt necessary for me to get rid of this top layer of skin and let it wear and tear away. This top layer of skin that had been protecting me from Rosie's disability and processing that, but also shielding me from accepting it and moving forward. And I spent some time, I researched the history of children with disabilities, and not just the history, the present. And I can tell you how dark it is. Suffering, exclusion, isolation, abandonment. Unthinkable actions made by parents unable to cope, but also parents who are not supported themselves. And there was one thing that especially stuck with me, and it made me realize that I wasn't losing my mind or being a bad parent. And that was the knowledge that parents like me go through a grieving process, where they come to terms with the loss of the future they had expected their child to have. And that is a significant loss, a titanic change in expectation. You will be lucky if you get to lunchtime without thinking, what's going to happen to my child when I'm dead? But coming to terms with accepting Rosie's situation did feel in some ways like a fresh start, a new layer of reptile skin ready to be exposed to its environment. Before lizards shed, they often seek environments of greater humidity, because this humidity allows the top layer of skin to gradually soften and expose the vulnerable new skin underneath. And humidity isn't something you see, But you feel it, and you know it's in the air all around you. You feel it with every movement you make, with every breath that you inhale into your body. And in human emotional terms, for us, it felt like finding a more hospitable environment. And this was really challenging because finding a hospitable school for Rosie, more suited to her needs, also meant I had to leave my job. I am a teacher in international schools, which means my children's education is part of my contract, part of my job. We are kind of like a package deal. So the only way to get Rosie into a more suitable school meant I had to leave a school leadership job, and I loved my job. I had worked there for 7 years. I had been promoted to assistant head teacher. I really loved the kids, the staff. I was excited about my future career there and what could happen. But the same school told me they would not be able to provide for my daughter's education needs, and they had to consider the safety of the community. And this was really tough because we were already going through such a challenging time, and you would kind of hope in that situation your job would at least provide a sense of stability, right? But no matter how tough that was, it was an easy decision to make. And I handed my notice in right away, and I hoped that against all the odds, I could find some employment in one of the very, very few international schools that provide support for learners of all abilities. And through a combination of luck, timing, and meeting some very caring people, we managed to do just that. And you know, the crazy thing is, when you're not used to it, kindness to your child can actually feel shocking and overwhelming. And for us, countless times since she was 2, hearing your child is behind, odd, strange, violent, well, just imagine how shocking it was, how nervous we were to take her to a new school. And how shocking it was to hear the first teacher ask, "Tell me about your daughter." Not what's wrong with her, what's her diagnosis, what's her disability, what are you guys doing wrong as parents, what's going on at home. Just tell me about your daughter. Simple, intentional words, but with such a profound impact. And for Rosie to attend a school where she is loved and cherished, we will be eternally grateful. She may still not be able to express gratitude verbally, but she knows when people care for her, instead of seeing her as some sort of problem to be solved or parasite to be pruned off. She smiles, she laughs when she sees and feels the care of others, and we think of them almost like heroes in human form. People that have chosen to spend their lives working with the most vulnerable children. And the really amazing thing is, this new job suits me better too. Leading the art and media department, coaching cross country, in some ways feels like a more sustainable, more durable, and better fitting layer of skin. The reptiles shed and regrow skin their whole life. And each new layer of skin, think of it like a fresh start. In human terms, we could call it a layer of hope, a way to feel that change is possible, be motivated during challenging times. But I've come to realize, certainly for me, hope is not something that's ever achieved alone. It relies on the care and support of other people around you. And every act of kindness you show or give to somebody, even if you think it's tiny, even if you think it's insignificant, it could stand for, it could mean much more than you think. A little bit like the inverse of the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And while I completely agree with the well-known African proverb, we all know it, right? It takes a village to raise a child, yes. But I think the truth goes further still. I would say that same village is also needed to sustain a parent. And one last thing about reptile skin. Just before the top layer of skin peels off and sheds, a temporary layer of skin is formed. And this is called the stratum intermedium, made of white blood cells, and it acts as a support for the top layer of skin. Well, it comes off and exposes the vulnerable new skin underneath. And I think it's a little bit like the care and support we need from others before we can let our top skin come off, expose our vulnerability, and keep growing. And when you become reptile-skinned in your challenges, hope may not be something you find. It might not find you. It might be something you work hard every single day defiantly to achieve. And each new layer of your reptile skin is a new layer of hope. Even though you know eventually that hope is going to break and tear off, you also know that you have the strength to continue to generate more. Okay, thank you very much.